Building Men is brought to you by Finish the Race Apparel, FTRapparel.com, the creators of all things building men, and by Become Stronger Industries, become-stronger.com, the creators of handmade steel maces, hammers, and other badass equipment.
At every single chance I get, I'm asking for help. You know, we live in a world, I think now more than ever, where transparency, especially for males, you know, asking for help, we feel like it's a sign of weakness. What I'm really saying is find a place like Building Men, find an organization, whether it's a local church group or whatever it is, where you can get in there and be transparent and just be honest about your feelings.
You're listening to the Building Men podcast with Dennis and Anthony Miralda, brothers on a mission
to help you become the strongest version of yourself, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically.
Welcome to the Building Men podcast. I am your host, Dennis Miralda, and joining me today, someone who came to me from Jamie Gruber, who is just a master of connectors. Jamie is a bridge builder in this space in personal development and growth and really helping connect people together. So Jamie recommended that I reach out to Mike Ayala and had a conversation with him, and his stories, it's a really cool story, and definitely with the Building Men audience will resonate with a lot of what Mike and I will talk about today. And Mike does a podcast called Investing for Freedom. He is in a space where he's an entrepreneur. He has a really, really cool story, and more than anything, he likes helping people and giving back. So Mike, welcome to the podcast. I appreciate you being here.
Hey, thanks for having me, brother. I'm excited to do it.
All right. This is going to be an interesting way to start the podcast. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start telling you a story. One, as a middle school principal, there were a couple of kids in my school that I knew I loved working with the young men, especially the kids who had a little bit of a bad streak, who did some stuff that was a little bit off. And I like to put my arm around them, like, listen, let's get this shit back on track here. Fast forward, I have two daughters in middle school, and they're telling me right now there's actually kids selling pixie sticks in school from their locker, and kids are fucking snorting pixie sticks in middle school. It's like become a pandemic. And the reason why I mention that is because little did they know that I'd be talking to someone who was a mastermind in this space of selling contraband from his locker as a middle school student. You talk about, and I never heard it said this way, you sold suckers from your locker in middle school. So let's start the podcast right there. Talk to us a little bit about that. What was going on there?
Well, I'll begin at the end of the story. And I've often said that was my first run-in with government bureaucracy and regulation shutting down my first business. It was kind of interesting. It's weird how, life just kind of puts this stuff together for us. I was in, I believe it was 7th grade, and there was actually a catering shop right across the street. And I went over there and met this older lady that had ran the store. Her name was Glenna. And she showed me, she had suckers put out. And basically, I took one of the suckers and she's like, yeah, you can make these. And so she gave me the recipe, and my mom invested in my first business, went and bought some Caro syrup and a, bag of sugar, and Glenna gave me the recipe, and I learned to make suckers and just started taking them to school. And, kids started buying these suckers for, 50 cents a piece, and I'd make suckers at night. My mom would help me, and I returned my mom's capital and just kept selling them. And then, before I knew it, I'm getting turned in to the principal's office, and they're like, you can't sell suckers anymore. And so like any entrepreneur does, we adapt, we overcome, we improvise. I went and got some little ice cube mold trays and started making gumdrop suckers instead of the stick. Cause that's what was the school's like, where the heck are all these suckers coming from? Everybody's eating suckers. So I turned them into little baggies and put little gumdrops in there and started selling them. But ultimately they shut me down.
Brilliant. And growing up, we called them lollipops. I had never heard it called a sucker before. So when I was listening to one of your podcast episodes, it was cracking me up that you're calling it a sucker. Where did you grow up that was part of the vernacular?
Nevada, northeastern Nevada.
Interesting. So I wonder if there's geographic lines I wonder where the line of delineation where it's a lollipop and it becomes a sucker. I'm interested in that. If you know the answer, someone who's listening, reach out, let me know. I'll throw you a Building Men shirt if you give me the right answer. So with that, then, Mike, you had this idea of you became an entrepreneur at a very, very young age as you were doing this. And who was the kid that ratted you out? Who was the kid that dimed you out? Do you remember that kid?
I don't know that I ever knew exactly who it was. It was probably the teachers. I was transacting during class, and I was trouble.
One thing that really resonated with me that you talk about, Mike, is you were raised by a really amazing woman. And on the Building Men podcast, we talk a lot about the influence and the impact that we as fathers have in our children's lives, or especially our sons' lives, and the message that we're trying to perpetuate to the young men that are going through difficult journeys. What I loved what you talked about was your mom was a complete badass. Your mom raised you in for a period of time in a single parent household. So I'd love for you to take us back through your story of, you speak very candidly about growing up in a family where your father was an alcoholic, he was addicted to drugs, and you had to learn a lot from your mother. So talk to us a little bit about what it was like growing up from the time you were, your memories going back into that point.
It's kind of funny because you come forward to this day and age, and everything that I love, traveling, being in different places, meals, these are all things that came from my childhood. And I think we have to be cognizant of that. And Dennis, this, it's all about doing the deep work. And I've gone back to this place a lot, and it really shaped a lot of who I was. My dad, my earliest memories of, just even in life, are living in different cities. We were in different cities all the time. And as a kid, it was just, I didn't know what was actually going on. He just couldn't really keep a job down. And so, I lived in Arizona, I lived in Mexico, I lived in Idaho, I lived Utah, I lived all over the place before I even started school. And my timeline with all of this is I started kindergarten when I was still 4 years old, was, almost 5. But so all this basically happened before that. And my memories of my dad, again, as you said, he was drunk, he was an alcoholic, he was always on drugs, couldn't keep a job down. I would remember him being gone for a period of time. And I don't really have, a concept of how long that time was, but whenever he would come back, I just remember my mom and him, having a fight, and there'd be crying involved, and then he'd be back in the life for a while. And there was these periods of time too, where my mom would disappear. And what I put together later was, these were periods of time where he would, literally just, abuse my mom, and then she would leave. And then this was kind of the pattern. She'd come back in, she'd leave me with my dad, and he never actually abused me. So, I was safe in that environment, and she would leave him. And then it was always the same pattern. She'd come back with my grandparents, she'd take me, we'd go away for a while, and then he'd be back in my life. And so, to make a long story short, as I started approaching 6, 7, 8 years old, they finally divorced completely when I think I was 7 or 8. And that was kind of this period of time where, they were no longer together, but I'd go stay with my dad. And Dennis, I just remember I hated going to my dad's house. I literally remember, going to this town that was like an hour and a half from where I lived. It was called Idaho Falls. And I remember what now is 2 men in a living room with 4 different women. I'm guessing they were prostitutes. There was, marijuana plants growing in the house. That was kind of the stuff that I was exposed to. And I just remember nights being at his house, I don't know what time it was in the morning, but I just remember wanting to go to sleep, and all I could hear was music and, partying, and I couldn't sleep. And I knew what marijuana smelled like long before I probably ever should have. So that was kind of like the life that I went through. And my mom, bless her heart, she finally, said enough is enough, and she pulled out of it, and she ended up leaving him. I went to live with my grandparents at that point in time, which was really the first couple of years of stability in my life. And I'll kind of kick it back to you, but she ultimately ended up marrying another guy. His name's Tino. He's, if I refer to my dad nowadays, he's my dad. I call him my bonus dad. And, just things really turned around. It didn't mean that, things were perfect from then forward, but that's kind of that's the childhood I had.
So your grandfather and Tino were the 2 men that you saw as role models in your life. Were there any other men? Did you have mentors or coaches or anyone else that you helped develop an understanding of what masculinity was as you were growing up?
It's kind of interesting. I don't think I've ever said this really, but my grandpa was not really a great example of masculinity either. My grandma was a very hard charging, she was very demeaning to him. And, but he was a very loving person. So I don't know that he was really a great example of masculinity. And my stepdad, while I love him to death, him and I, we had a good relationship, but I wouldn't say it was a real, he taught me a lot, but I don't know that he ever had the ability to really speak into my life. And just, I think it was the period of time, by the time I moved in with them, I think I was 10 or, whatever the age was. And he was a great dad to me. He really helped, he supported me, but I don't know that I ever really received him. He would have, but I don't know that I ever received him really. So was he a great image of masculinity? Yes. Was he a great example? Yes. Did he really mentor and train, like role model for me in some areas, but I don't know that I ever fully received that. So to answer your question, I started working at an early age. I think I was 12 years old. I started cleaning a doctor's office that my mom was working in on the weekend. And then I got a job at Denny's when I was, I think 15. And I had a couple role models in the restaurant industry that really taught me a ton. One of the guys' name was Ben French. He was probably my first real example of, what leadership was, what masculinity truly was. He pushed me hard, but it was good for me every minute.
I appreciate that. And I'll bring it back to you towards the end of the podcast, wrap it back around to your mother and what she's up to now. But I wanted to take a moment just to recognize all the single moms out there. What you're trying to do is raise a family and try to have that nurturing space, but you have to fill roles of the feminine and the masculine at the same time. As in, dating a woman who's raising two teenage boys, it's hard work. It's hard work. So just a shout out to your mom for going through that. And I appreciate what you said about your father and your grandfather. It's interesting. We look to these figures, to these male figures, and it's not what they're saying, it's what they're doing. And we're getting a lot of who we are from what we're seeing, how men interact with one another. And so you went down this blue collar route, as did I growing up. My father was a painter. My first job was, I was 13 or 14 years old painting. So I learned the value of hard work, as did you. And so your story leads you down where you developed a trade, and your trade was working in a plumbing industry. And that took you off in a direction where it eventually led to this entrepreneurial lifestyle that you're leading right now. So talk to us a little bit about graduating or leaving high school, and then why you decided to go into that world of, blue collar work.
So leaving high school, I'd actually, and I don't need to digress into this too much, but I had, working in the restaurant industry, I had gotten pretty connected with some adult, drug users, and started going down that path. And to answer your question, so once I graduated, I had a pretty strong bout with methamphetamines and ended up in jail. And I had met my wife in high school. And so during that time, her and I had actually separated. And then when I actually got out of jail, and this is the reason why I'm sharing that, I actually, I started going to church, and I reconnected with who's now my wife. We've been married for 23 years. But I also went back to work for the guy that I was talking about that, kind of mentored me in Denny's. He had left and started another restaurant. He gave me another chance. I'd started getting my life back together, and then realized that I didn't want to be in the restaurant industry. So then I got a job at this place with a friend of mine, building hydraulic hoses. Along the way, this guy had reached out to me who ran a plumbing and heating company, and had asked me if I wanted to be in the apprenticeship program. And really, I was not interested in being a plumber. That was not really like on my radar. But then through that series of events, when I found myself working in the restaurant and then, doing the hydraulic hoses, I'm kind of like, at this point in time, my wife and I were dating, getting pretty serious. And I don't know what it was, Dennis, but I just had this, like, I just picked up the phone one day. I was like, I don't want to be working at a hydraulic hose plant the rest of my life. I called that guy and I'm like, hey, is that position still open? He's like, yeah, you can start Monday. I feel like it was one of those moments where I almost went blind into my future. Not really thinking about it, but Karen and I have talked about this so many times. If it hadn't been for that moment and me asking if the apprenticeship program was still available, I don't think everything would have worked out the way it was. And so did I have a plan? Not necessarily. But I just knew that I needed to go that direction. And my wife talks about this a lot. She has a podcast called Marriage, Money, and Mayhem. And she put out an episode where she was actually talking about how your spouse or your partner can actually, be a hindrance. And when I told her I was going to work for this company, she was like, no, you can't do that. It's not what you need to do, because they were going to be working me out of town. And sometimes you got to just do what you need to do. And that kind of set me up for, moving into really what created an amazing business and created our financial freedom, got us into real estate, all of that.
One thing that you mentioned on your podcast was the book Who Not How by Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy. It's a book that I recently read listened to the audiobook. I was on a long drive. And a couple of things that really stood out to me in that book were, one, the idea of it's not how you're going to do things. It's who are the people that you need to connect with that can get you a little bit closer to whatever it is. And one thing that they talk about is the idea of procrastination. And thinking about procrastination at a deep level, whatever it is in front of you that's getting you stuck or you're not, there's a reason why. You have to like have that tough conversation with yourself. Why are you not doing whatever it is? Is it because there's a reason that you're not interested in it, or is there another person that could potentially be doing that could alleviate that from your whatever the to-do list that you have? So when you reach out to this guy, that was another example of who, not how. It was this person, and he immediately responded with, yeah, come on, jump on board. And that one decision changed the trajectory of your life, not knowing at the time that you were going to be working 100-hour weeks and it was going to suck for a period of time, but it ultimately got to where you were going. So take us a little bit deeper into that journey then, if you wouldn't mind, Mike, about, so now you're finding a level of success with this, but it also required some travel on your part. So talk to us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah. So this was pre-Kara and I getting married. I was working out of town. Like I said, we, traveled quite a bit. So going to work for that company was, part of that. But again, Kara and I weren't married yet. And so you fast forward, I'll digress a little bit here. One of the things that Kara and I always did, even in high school, we used to be on the phone till 1-2 o'clock in the morning on school nights. We were always dreaming about the future, visioning what the future looked like long before we were married. One of the things that we talked about when we got married and started thinking about the life we wanted to design was, what I didn't have. So we can learn a lot. We can learn just as much from good examples as we can bad. And, my dad not being present, never being there, I decided I wasn't going to be an abusive father. I wasn't going to be a father that wasn't present. Karen and I decided that we were going to live life by design. And one of the things that we always said was that we wanted to make memories with our children, and we would put that over possessions. And, I've talked about this a lot. What we've learned is that you can actually have both. You just got to keep the priorities straight. And so back to the question, I went to work for this company. I became an apprentice. I grew really fast in the organization. I found myself at the age of 23, working for this company out of town. I was working at a casino, running a crew of between 16 and 20. We were doing a huge expansion right on the border of Utah and Nevada. And Kara's pregnant with our third child. So Dylan was our first one, and then Tim, and then she's pregnant with Kaiten. I'm working out of town, literally over 100 hours a week. We'd work. They were moving so fast on this casino. We'd work all day, and then I'd go to the room and just do change orders and paperwork all night. So Sunday night, I'd head home. I'd get home late, I'd wash my clothes, have a cold dinner, and head back to the job site Monday morning at 3 a.m. and do it all over again. And I woke up and I realized, like, this is not what we had signed up for. And so again, sometimes the universe nudges you. I think you just got to be aware of it. One of my mentors always says the deal of the decade comes along every week. You just got to be aware of it and looking for it. And that was the case with this. There's these little nudges, that kind of point you in the right direction. And, I look back, and whether it's who or, the what, the universe really aligns around us if we're looking for it. And so opportunity rose. Me and a partner started a business in 2004, a plumbing and heating company. We grew so fast. I think we got our license in May or June of that year in 2004. And by the end of that year, we'd almost done $1 million in revenue. I think we had about 20 employees. We grew so fast. We were on the Inc. fastest growing companies in America in 2009. I got over 100 employees at one stage. And keep in mind, this all started as a 24-year-old kid, basically. I had, I didn't go to school. I didn't have any formal education. I didn't know anything about leadership. And so I was just getting my hands on everything I could read, listen to, magazines about leadership, entrepreneurship. I was hiring the best coaches I could find. That's where the who, not how comes in, because we were growing so fast. I didn't have time to, not hire people or not figure it out or not bring in coaches. It was crazy.
Yeah. And that book it's a game changer. So for those of you listening, if you haven't read it yet, definitely go out and get the book, Who Not How, Dan Sullivan, Ben Hardy. You had mentioned the idea of leadership. So I'll ask you to go a little bit deeper into that realm. You said you didn't know a lot about leadership, and I'm always interested with leaders. Is a leader born? Do you have this as part of your DNA coding, or is it through the trials and tribulations that you go through where people have to step up into situations? So for you, do you feel like you had some type of leadership as part of your DNA coding, that was who you were? It just someone needed to pick it out of you? Or was it a mentor or coach or someone that taught you how to be a leader?
I think it's both. And I don't mean to deflect there's a lot of conversations and different viewpoints on this. Are leaders born, are leaders made? I do believe that we're born. I do believe that I was born with leadership skills and abilities. And I'm a huge fan of traction. We implement traction in all of our businesses. If I had traction back in the day, my partner and I were actually amazing partners. I'm a visionary. He was an integrator. If we knew the traction terminology back in the day, we might still be business partners today, to be honest. So I do believe, so the reason why I brought up traction, there's visionaries and then there's integrators. I do believe that we have different personality types, and whether you look at a DISC personality profile or whatever it is, I do think that entrepreneurs, visionaries tend to be, in a certain personality type. So that being said, I also think that it's very possible to be born a leader and yet not hone those skills. If you're not going to reach out and study and learn and be mentored, then you're not going to hone those leadership skills too. So I'm kind of in the middle. Do I think that leadership is something you're born with? Yeah, I think you're born with characteristics and traits around that. But also I think that there's people that, have, and I don't mean to put people in a box, but let's just say if you're going to look at the DISC personality profile, I do believe that while most leaders are Ds and have a version of an I do believe that there's people that run very successful businesses that are also S's and C's that don't necessarily have that, dominant visionary attitude or personality, yet they run successful businesses because they learn, they nurture that leadership ability. So is it either or? I don't think so. But I do believe that I was born with some, leadership abilities, and I work hard every single day to continue to hone that.
I would agree with that as well. And in any aspect, I believe the nature versus nurture, I think 70% is part of who we are, and the other 30% is made up of our experiences and what we decide to make of our lives. So if I'm a 17-year-old kid listening to this episode right now, Mike, and I'm in high school, and I feel that I have a propensity to go towards a position in my life, in my path, that will put me in front of other people in the role of a leader. What's a lesson or two that you would love to pass on in your experience, that if I'm a 17-year-old, if I were doing these things on a regular basis, it would help me to become a better leader?
Asking for help. Like at every single chance I get, I'm asking for help. If I'm stuck somewhere, we live in a world, I think now more than ever, where transparency, especially for males, asking for help, we feel like it's a sign of weakness. We feel like we're going to be made fun of. The more transparent I get about me and my feelings. And so when I say asking for help, it's not necessarily, hey, will you, help me change the tire on my truck or, pick me up at this place. We all need to ask for that kind of help. What I'm really saying is find a place like Building Men, find an organization, whether it's a local church group or whatever it is, where you can get in there and be transparent and just be honest about your feelings. I joined GoBundance, which is where I met Jamie Gruber, I don't know, in 2018 or 2019. And I'll never forget this. And I don't think I shared this with you. I don't think Jamie probably even knows this. I've always been part of a mastermind. I've always been part of some kind of group that made me better. Not always, but from the time I got into business. And I always look at it as a major and a minor. So I'm always going to be in one major thing and one minor thing, which I don't know, we need to get in the weeds on that. But I was actually coming out of coaching with Dan Sullivan in Strategic Coach. I was in Strategic Coach for a few years. And I had also been in a mastermind with the real estate guys. I was finishing both of those up and felt led. And I had actually told my wife, I'm looking for an organization that helps work on me, where I can be, more real, more transparent, deal with some of my, deep rooted issues from my childhood, all this stuff that we as men are not taught to ask for help and to not be transparent and open and honest. And through a series of events, it actually led me to GoBundance. And I'll never forget my first event. They do a thing called a Go Talk. And my entire Go Talk was around this kid who was raised in an abusive household with an alcoholic father, and had actually, and this was the first time that I had shared this with a group of men. I don't think I'd really talked to anybody about it, but maybe my wife. I had realized that I was really good at building relationships with women, but I did not know how to have authentic relationships with males. And Dennis, this isn't 20 years ago that I'm having this epiphany. This was 3 or 4 years ago. And so I went into GoBundance and I set a goal for myself. And so my advice is ask for help. Find a place where you can be yourself, be transparent, be vulnerable. I found that place in GoBundance. I realized that I didn't know how to have authentic male relationships. And so I went in there and set a goal of building one authentic relationship with a male per quarter. And this sounds weird. Like you're probably listening to this and like, Mike, you sound like, you're having some kind of weird relation. No, one authentic relationship, deep connection with a male once a quarter. That was my goal. And I woke up a year later and I had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of amazing conversations with males, with thought leaders, and how did that all happen? By being transparent and asking for help, saying, hey, this is what I'm struggling with. This is what I need help with. Can you pray for me? What would you do in this situation? We're not taught to do that as men.
Building men of character, integrity, strength, compassion, and empathy through transformational mentoring, coaching, and motivational speaking is our mission here at Building Men. To work with me as a one-on-one life coach, you can find information in the show notes, or you can visit our website at buildingmen.io, where you can book a free 30-minute discovery call to help you become the strongest version of yourself mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically. Now, back to the show. I love that epiphany that you had, Mike, and I appreciate you saying that. And I think it's much more common in men. It's men don't share those thoughts, though. My younger brother Anthony, who will be a co-host with me from time to time, mentioned the same exact thing, and he recognized a lot of it was the family that we were raised, the dynamic with our own father, several situations that happened with us along the journey. But he recognized, for him, it was really easy to be friends with women. There was not this level of alpha thing going on where there was a competition, and he always felt like he could not fully invest into it. It was very surface level. Hey, let's go out, we'll have a couple beers, we'll talk about the game, we'll bitch about this or that, and then we'll move on and we'll talk, but it was numbing those experiences. So to find that group of men to be able to lean into the conversations, and you hit the nail on the head, to be transparent and to be vulnerable, that is an absolute strength. It is absolutely a strength to be able to do that. And the more we can normalize that for young men, the better society will be moving forward. I want to shift slightly, Mike, into the idea. So now you mentioned Kara, and you as husband and wife, lessons that you've learned from her, even ways that you mentioned on her podcast that, your relationship with your significant other, they might be giving you advice based on their schema, their situation, that might not be the right path for you to take. So you've developed this idea of relationship dynamics with your wife and developed a program around it. So talk to us a little bit about how that came about, you and Kara working together in a space helping married couples.
I'll go all the way back. And again, maybe this is, part of my childhood, but I remember early on. So again, we got married early. She was 20. No, I was 20. She was 19. We had a kid a year later. Like literally we were married in May and Dylan shows up in May a year later. But I remember early on, if I go to a bachelor party or whatever, you give advice. My advice was always to pick your battles. Like most shit just doesn't matter. And this isn't just for marriage, by the way. This is for anything. I find myself getting so worked up, and I've calmed down a lot over time. You all will as you get older, but there's so much that doesn't matter. And so Kara and I think every once in a while you look at a couple, you look at a relationship, and you see that there's something special there. It doesn't mean they're perfect. It doesn't mean that they don't disagree. It doesn't mean that they don't have arguments. And I don't know what the recipe is for that, other than, I don't know if you know who Naval Ravikant is. He's a tech entrepreneur. I love the Almanac of Naval Ravikant, but I've heard multiple people say this, and this is one of the things that he said: the most important decision that you'll make in life is your partner, the partner that you marry. And by the way, I think that continues to go on. Business partners will be second or third along the way. Who we partner in life is our most important decision, because there's so much energy around that. And just like what my wife said, she could have continued to press that issue and stopped me. And literally, it doesn't matter how connected we are. We can never know each other's thoughts or true desires, or, when we're called to do something. And so there needs to be some grace there to really hear each other out and not respond, but also give each other the grace to make decisions around our own life and trust each other. It's all built on that. But back to what Naval said, it's the most important decision you make. And so I don't know what the recipe is, other than, for the young people that are listening, or, people that are maybe considering getting married or remarried or whatever. I don't want to make the decision harder, but for me, it was literally just does this person encourage me? Does she challenge me in a positive way? Can I see spending the rest of that? These are the questions that, my oldest son is 21 and him and his girlfriend have been together for 2.5 years, and they're talking about marriage. And it's the same simple advice. Like, can you see yourself with this person for the rest of your life? And so back to your question about the couples mastermind, what is it? We really work with couples that are we say it this way, trying to take their relationship from a 7 or an 8 to a 9 or a 10. So we're not marriage counselors or any of that. We're looking for a very specific couple that already, has built a life together. They're challenging each other. They're encouraging, and they just want to learn to grow together a little bit more, but it takes all kinds. But I just don't know exactly what the recipe is, other than it just comes back to that simple advice when I'm just pick your battles, because most of the shit just does not matter. And by the way, that's the same thing, with your children. It's the same thing with all of that. Like I've learned to really just look through a lens and a filter of, does this really matter? Or is this just pissing me off for some reason? Is this just irritating me? Is it rubbing something wrong? Is this really about me? A lot of times it is a reflection of us. It's us not doing the deep work, and somebody's triggering something in me that really has nothing to do with them. It's all about me. So pick your battles.
And I appreciate that. And the word trigger has popped up in my life several times over the last 2 years or so, as I started to look to coaches and to mentors and to do that difficult, deep work. I recognize that I do have triggers from my experience in my childhood, from my past marriage. There are things that will come up that another person will say. It has nothing to do with them at all. It has to do with the words that they say, or the way, the nonverbals, whatever it is, causes an emotion in me that initially I would lash out like I did back when I was 12 or when I was 28 or when I was 41. It's recognizing that you do have those triggers and really sitting with it. I love to write about shit like that as it comes up, Mike. As things come up, I'm like, what? Let me write it down. Let me read it out to myself to figure out what's going on here that I need to take a deeper look at. So I appreciate you saying that. And then you also brought in the kids to it. So I'll shift a little bit of the focus to, as you're raising kids, a lot of the stuff doesn't matter. Like when you look at it in the grand scheme of things, is this something that's going to matter in 5 years, in 5 months, in 5 weeks? Like let's really think about what's going on here. But having said that, there is this level with our kids that we want to make sure that we are sweating the small stuff enough that we're not teaching them to become assholes as well. I think it's our job as parents. Jordan Peterson talks about it in 12 Rules. He talks about, don't let your kids do something that's going to make you dislike them. So as a parent, how do you manage that? You don't want to like, all right, this is not a big deal in the long run, but also balancing it with, I have to make it a big deal, because if I don't, the little thing can become a bigger thing.
So without getting, to me, this is a values question. And we can instill values in our children without telling them what our values are. And the challenging thing with this is, as a human gets older, I'm not even going to say children, as a human gets older, we get harder and harder to shape and mold. And, I know that as an adult male, like when I got my head on something, like this is the deep work that I have a coach that I work with every single week, and it isn't inexpensive. And I will probably always have a coach, and it's just working on my shit. The older the kids get, the harder it's going to be to instill those values in them. So that being said, Kara and I were fortunate to be able to get our arms around this at an early age, even though we didn't know exactly what we were doing. I'll just give you a few things that we've thought about, and just really lived with our children. So number one, I visually have looked at raising my children like bowling. When we would go bowling with our kids, I actually really didn't enjoy it when they were younger, because they always want the bumpers up, right? And I'm like, but I like realized early on, like my job as a parent is to just purely keep them out of the gutter. Like, I don't care if they get a strike every time, just keep them out of the gutter. That's a simple analogy, but the few things that Kara and I did going forward, we always treated our kids just like another little human. I mean, Dylan, and we were probably a little extreme when it came to Dylan, but I remember Dylan sitting at the dinner table when he was 2 and 3 and 5 and 7. He's always been in the conversation. Kara and I did not have a lot of conversations without our kids. There was not a lot of conversations that we refused to have around our kids. They knew our business. They knew our struggles. They knew our wins, knew our victories. We talked somewhat openly about, money and wealth and freedom. I think the key is treating them like humans, because that's what they are. They're just little developing humans. And here's a little, one day, Kara, there's these little things that you learn along the way that I think are valuable. One day, Kara, and these are some of our, ingrained beliefs and thought processes, and everybody brings them into a relationship. The husband does, the wife does. So my daughter had a sleepover on a Friday night, and then she comes and she says, it's now Saturday. And she says, hey, can Carly or whoever sleep over again? And Kara says, no, you already had one sleepover this week. Kara and I always said, we're going to remain a united front. So I didn't say anything in front of the kids, but Kaiten, went off and she's unhappy about it. And I'm like, what, are we doing something tonight? And Kara's like, no. I'm like, well, why can't Carly sleep over? I'm making up Carly. I don't know who it was. And she's like, well, she had one sleepover this week. And I'm like, okay, well, if we're going to make her not have a sleepover, like we probably should have a family night or something, right? Because there's this thing that we do as parents where it's like, no family time, no, screen time. No, we're going to have, okay. By the way, we always had dinners together. We always did the thing. And I think that's where the values things come in. The more you spend time with your children and the more you treat them like humans, the more they're going to treat you like a human and not be an asshole. And by the way, I used to say this up until recently, probably a year ago. I said, you know what? I'm not saying this anymore. I used to say the jury's still out because, our kids are still growing, but Dylan's almost 22, Tim's 20, Aiden's 18. They're amazing humans. We've had very little issues with them, and we were not helicopter parents. We did not have a lot of rules. So back to if we have these little rules, and Kara had a rule in her house that she could only have one sleepover a week, that rolled into our house. And through that conversation, and this is where the value in this is, she brought up this, we had a conversation around being yes parents. The universe always says yes to us. As we get older and we're doing the deep work, we have to reprogram all the no's that we've been told. You can't do this. Where are you going to get the money? How are you going to accomplish that? All these limiting beliefs were put into us by something or someone. And I think we have to be really careful as parents that we don't become no parents, we become yes parents. So the real, anchor in this is Kara and I decided, we made a conscious decision when the kids were younger that we were going to say yes every opportunity that we could. So before I said no to my kids, I really slowed down and said, okay, why is this a no? I mean, obviously safety, obviously don't be an asshole, as you were talking about with Jordan Peterson. Right. There's got to be rules there. But one of our rules was say yes as often as possible, because the universe is yes to them. And we became yes parents. So that was one of the big anchoring things for us. The other one that I'll throw out there too, and then we can go wherever you want. I told my kids from an early age, by the way, I tell my employees this too, just whatever you do, you have to always tell me the truth, because if you're not telling me the truth, I can't help us get through whatever it is. Now there's another side to this conversation. And I've had this conversation with many parents. If you say this to your children, whatever you do, don't lie to me, always tell me the truth. Then you have to be ready for the truth, no matter what it is. Because the first time that you retaliate when a kid comes and tells you the truth about something is the minute that you just lost the last 3 months or 6 months or 6 years or 12 years of trust with them. By them not violating your trust, if you retaliate, you're going to violate their trust. But that's a big commitment as a parent. So these are the kind of things that I don't think it has to be overly complicated, but I think we have to be the adult. We have to make sure that the values that we're teaching and instilling are ones that we're going to live by as well.
I appreciate that, Mike. And the word that comes to mind is intentionality. And it seems like you and Kara were very intentional with all these things that you have put into place, that you have done, not only in your business as a partnership, but also as parents. I'm going to title this episode Life by Design, because I truly believe that. You mentioned that was a phrase that you used before. Matt Beaudreau he was on the Building Men podcast a few months back. He runs a podcast called The Essential 11, where he interviews people from all over the world. And he is one of the creators of Acton Academy, and he does an Apogee program. Really, really great guy. I heard him recently talk about, in front of a larger audience, somebody was asking him about his own kids and how he disciplines them. And his kids are 14, 11, and 9, something like that. He goes, I don't discipline my kids. I teach my kids the concept of self-discipline, and they see me as a self-disciplined human being. We can say all we want to our kids, but it's what they see us do in those moments. Are we a human being that practices that idea of self-discipline? And it goes back to what you said with your kids, being a yes man or a yes woman with your kids. but then being really intentional with the conversations you're having and doing what you're saying, following through with that as well. So if it's, listen, don't lie to me and I will be here for you, and then they tell you the truth and you ground them for 7 months, they're like, fuck that, I'm not going to tell them the truth anymore. So I really appreciate that. Mike, you talk about in a couple of your podcasts that you talk about this idea of mentoring is really, really important, which I totally understand, 100% agree with. You talk about this balance between hunger and humility and really being dialed into what you want to do. Like, what do you want to accomplish in your life, and what is your North Star? What is the thing that's driving you or pulling you in a specific direction? So as we're winding down on this podcast, I would love to know, with what you're doing right now, what do you think of as your North Star?
I'm gonna start off by I've been in this zone recently where I'm really, really cognizant of seasons. And the thing that I talk about, what do you really want? Why do you want it? What are you going to do to get it? Measure results and adjust. And I'm a huge fan of adjusting. And the old school, set goals, see it through, don't waver. I agree with all that, but also like seasons are so important. And I'm in this crazy season that I'm really trying to like just be cognizant. The whole last 20 years of my life, let's say 23 years, 24, has been around, being the best husband I could be, being an intentional father. As you said, we said we wanted to make memories over possessions. I didn't want to miss soccer games. Nobody was going to tell me that I couldn't, take off work at 1:00 in the afternoon because I need to go to Dad's and Donuts or whatever. My kids have seen the world, and it's actually through a group called Front Row Dads and GoBundance that has kind of helped me with this. My North Star is still the same. It's humans, it's relationship. It's what I value most. Because on the other side of anything we need in life, I love the Zig Ziglar quote, you can have anything you want in life if you just help enough other people get what they want. And a lot of times I think people think of that through a lens of business or sales or revenue or whatever. No, it's just, again, asking for help. It's the same advice, just being able to give help and ask for help. My North Star is to have, healthy relationships. And the reason why I brought up the seasons is because I went through a period of time, like the last year to 2 years ago, where I felt like I had put so much time and effort and energy into being a dad and just being the best version of that I could be. Sorry. And, I was actually struggling with it because I'm like, I'm not a dad anymore. And Mike McCarthy, actually, this is why, mentoring and getting around amazing humans is so important. Mike McCarthy told me, he's like, you're just entering a different season of being a dad. And so that's the thing that, when we talk about the North Star, like, I don't think it ever changes, but the version of it changes and the way we show up changes. And so I'm just looking forward to the next 20 years of being, as Mike McCarthy from GoBundance said, he's like, it might need you in this next 20 years more than they even needed you in the last 20, because as a male, and this is true today, if the kids need something or want something, they're going to call their mom. Like, we'll be sitting next to each other and mom's phone rings, right? She's the nurturer. And that's what kids need, not that they don't need the masculine and not that they didn't need, and I'm a nurturing father, I really am. But this was the thing that like helped me. Our roles change. And so I don't think our North Star necessarily changes, and it's about relationships and humans, but the people and the version of that and the roles that we show up in are going to change as life changes. And so I'm entering this season where I've really just been doing that deep work around that. And when Mike McCarthy said, your kids, your season of fatherhood isn't over, it's just a different version. I'm entering a season where my kids are becoming adults. They're thinking about getting married. 2 of them have businesses already that they live off of full time. At the age of 21 and 20. By the way, we were never like, you have to go to college or this is what you need to be. Like, we mined their zone of genius and that back to the yes thing. Like, every time we ever saw our kids get interested in something, we went all in on it until they decided it wasn't what they wanted. And so I'm just entering a new season. And so the North Star doesn't change. It's about relationships and humans. Cause really on the other side of it, like, I don't care if you have $1 million or $10 million or $100 million. If you have, I think of the scripture a lot. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world, but to lose his soul? I've thought about this like for years. What does it profit us to gain the whole world, but to lose our soul? What is our soul? And I know that, part of that's probably talking about, eternity, but really like my soul is relationships and it's humans, it's interaction. That's the currency of life. And so I'm in a new season, but my North Star is still the same. It's just relationships. It's humans. It's continuing to, it's another 20 years of being the best possible husband I can be, which is a challenge in itself, right? Because we're so selfish and everything else. But also I'm really excited to see what my kids do. And then the conversation around grandkids. Oh my God.
That is absolutely tremendous, Mike. I appreciate you going down that vulnerable journey with us as well. I know as you were talking, it choked me up listening to what you said about relationships. And to quickly cycle back around, I'm not going to ask a question, just to close the loop on your mom. During COVID, your mom started a business, or she bought a business, and now she's running a bar. So she was this unbelievably strong, powerful figure in your life, and you were able to help her get going in her next chapter of her life. So even think about the season of your life when you're, looking to your mom for God, and she was helping you start the sucker business back in 7th grade, and now you were helping her get going. That was a cool experience for me to go through as a listener of your podcast. So Mike, where can the Building Men audience find you? How can they get in touch with you?
I have the Investing for Freedom podcast. I love, just as you do, sharing guests and wisdom and insight there. And on Instagram, I'm the Mike Ayala. Jamie always gives me crap. It's the Mike Ayala. So yeah, just those are probably the two main places. Just reach out to me on Instagram, or, would love a follow on the podcast.
Awesome. We'll put all that information out in the show notes for the Building Men audience, building.men on Instagram, buildingmencoach@gmail, and our website is buildingmen.io. Thanks to our sponsors, Finish the Race Apparel and Become Stronger Industries. Thank you, Mike Ayala. This is an awesome journey. I'd love to run it back and go deeper into a couple of the other things that you're into right now, and we'll do that again in the future. Building Men audience, go a step further than you thought you can go. We'll see you next time on Building Men.